Hi, my name is Matt Watson. I've spent the last 40 years working with clients, planning, furnishing, and managing their workspace in the face of the greatest change in human history. Today, we're kicking off Transcending Workspace, which is a podcast that we started talking about how organizations are adapting to the greatest rate of change in human history. And we hope to connect with leaders managing this dynamic environment and what their strategies are to achieve their company's mission and vision through this great change. Today's guest, we have David Nilssen, who is the co-founder and CEO of Guidant Financial and Doxa 7. Guidant has helped nearly 25,000 entrepreneurial-minded individuals access $5 billion to start or acquire small businesses and franchises. Doxa 7 helps entrepreneurs to build teams leveraging global talent out of places like Vietnam and the Philippines. David currently serves as the Global Learning Chair for the entrepreneurial organization worldwide. Welcome, David Nilssen.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's fun to be here.
Well, David, I think your story is really interesting, and let's start with kind of the beginning when you and Jeremy co-founded Guidant. Tell us a little bit how you started the business and kind of how you got to here.
Sure. Well, as you said, I started a company back in 2003 called Guidant Financial with a partner, Jeremy Ames. Both of us came from different aspects of the real estate industry, and we met through a mutual acquaintance. And at the time, I was developing real estate on the peninsula in Bremerton, Washington. So this is when they reactivated the Navy base due to the war on terror. So we were buying up, raw lots and helping to bring in homes to support the lack of infrastructure that they had at the time. Somebody said I should meet this guy, Jeremy Ames. And when we got a chance to connect over coffee, we realized that we both had a passion for this industry. And he was helping investors invest in speculative real estate. And we thought there may be an opportunity to do a deal together. So we sat down with a real estate attorney to structure a deal where he'd bring some investors and we would, help to effectively develop some land on behalf of them. And in doing so, this real estate attorney suggested we look at retirement plans as a way to fund this transaction.
Interesting. To fund your own entrepreneurial venture.
Well, for these investors use their retirement funds as investment capital
Right.
to invest in things like real estate. And later we found out you could do more than just real estate. There was the opportunity to invest in tax liens and private mortgages and even small businesses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So it was really just an attorney who brought this up as a way to fund your own entrepreneurial adventure that you then found out this is an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, well, it was something that at the time had been primarily reserved for high net worth individuals and really hadn't made its way to Main Street. So it was this emerging opportunity that many people hadn't heard of, including ourselves. And so we actually helped a couple of investors use their retirement funds to invest in real estate, and we were able to turn those properties relatively quickly. And thankfully, those people had lots of friends they wanted to talk to about it. And so next thing you know, my phone is blowing up with people who want me to help them invest their retirement assets in real estate. And that was the early sort of way that we identified there was an opportunity. So we launched the business at that time, focused on real estate. But what was interesting is, as we did, we realized that you could invest in things like your own small business or franchise. And both Jeremy and I loved real estate, but we really more loved the business of real estate. So the idea of helping entrepreneurs find new ways to gain access to capital was really exciting for us. So Guidant eventually evolved. It was originally real estate focused, but because we know that about 3/4 of the people that actually apply for loans from banks get declined, and because about 80% of the small businesses that fail, it can be attributed to a lack of capital. We felt there was a really great opportunity for us to support small businesses by going all in on that particular strategy. So today the team at Guidant spends their time helping new entrepreneurs, whether they're buying or starting a business or franchise, to get capital so that they can do that.
Wow. So you start in Bellevue, Washington. You figure out, hey, I got to hire some people. I need to start creating, more or less a business that's going to support these folks who are coming at me with, hey, I want to invest my funds in, or my real estate into, not just real estate, but any franchise or businesses. I want to build a business with my investment capital. So tell us a little bit about the humble beginnings of your office in Bellevue and how that started.
Well, yeah. So, that's what ended up happening, right? We launched this business to help individuals use their capital to invest in alternative assets. Now, today it's focused primarily on small business
Right.
owners. But when we started in Bellevue, we decided, hey, we needed to find an office space.
Yeah.
And like most entrepreneurs, I should say, at least in our case, we bootstrapped the business. So we started with our own capital. We never raised any. We didn't take on any debt. We just launched the business and let it organically grow over time. And as you said in the intro, we've done that very well. I mean, today we still have the same shareholder base, and we've helped put nearly $5 billion to work in about 25,000 small businesses across the U.S. But we had to have an office, so we actually did what a lot did, and we subleased. Right, we found somebody who had gotten themselves into a lease and needed out of it for whatever reason that was, and we sort of took that thing over and sort of moved in to this office space that was far from perfect because it was built out by someone totally different.
Sure. Many people just get into like their businesses, and they take on leases with furnished space, and then they grow into it organically, and then say, and they start altering that space to make it work for them. And that's probably what you wound up doing. I know you and I connected through EO, I don't know, 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago. I don't know, David. I got gray. I know, and you got a little gray too. So, anyways, but the fantastic experience we had with working with you is we wound up, connecting with you as you were growing out of your space, and you were taking that next step, that leap into a much larger space. Did we move you twice? I can't remember, but I know the last space we moved in was 10,000 feet, Class A space, downtown Bellevue, right along I-405, and it was quite an expensive venture. I mean, we installed over 100 workstations and had a fairly high density there.
Yeah, that was an important move for us actually, because actually you guys moved us twice. The first time was 10,000. The second time was, I think, 16,000.
Oh, was that 16? Got it.
Yeah, so it was a big space. I mean, for us, when I think back at our first 2 or 3 offices, which were all subleases, we moved, I think, 5 times in the first 5 years. So that just tells you, we really didn't know how fast we would grow, and we grew like a rocket ship. But at the time we started to get a little bit better handle on our growth, we had to go into a place and make it our own, because we kept moving to these office spaces that were, remember the first one, I think we had 15 or 16 people in there, and there was 20 offices. There was no collaboration space. It wasn't open at all. It felt like you just went into a place that you had rented your own private office. And so by the time you guys came on board, and I remember you sat down with us and you were like, well, what's the experience you want to create? And I've never really thought about office space from that standpoint. And we designed this really open, collaborative concept with lots of places for people to just have what I would call these drive-by meetings and collaboration sessions out in the open and not behind closed doors, which was, I think, a little bit ahead of the time, the first time that you helped us work through that.
Yeah, and I think that the hard part is when you're trying to gauge as a business owner how quickly you're going to grow, and the real estate is a finite resource. Once you invest into a lease, you're set for a certain period of time, and those two things are always out of alignment in a very fast growing environment like you've always had at your kind of confronted. And so you and Jeremy learned very early on how to kind of navigate change and bring change in, and probably we're a bit immune to the effects of change, meaning a lot of people get bummed out, get threatened, they fear change. It sounds like you and Jeremy learned how to embrace it.
Well, it's actually one of our values. So our overarching values are PACED. We call it PACED. It's PACED. It's passion, adaptability, community, excellence, and diversity. Okay. And adaptability is a big one. So we always say, like, hey, look, we have to be part of driving change, because that is the only thing that is for certain in our business, is that things are going to evolve. And so it's one of the things that we look for when we hire people, is to make sure that they know and understand that early, that they've demonstrated the ability to sort of roll with the punches, because we never know how the market's going to adapt. And as a business, we just have to be a adaptable organism and not one that's resistant to change. And so it's just part of our DNA.
Yep, and I say the same about Apex. We've learned a lot from working with clients like Guidant, because I mean, when we were working with you on the last space that we put you in before the last big change we're going to talk about here in a minute, we were really engaged in trying to figure out how to connect teams and culturally attune our organization to meeting rhythm. And I know there's a lot of benefit with EO to, what's his name wrote the book, and he has that amazing book around how to really create meeting rhythms within each team and then within the organization so that we stay connected. And we had the privilege to come to your all hands meetings where the culture would get together and you would acknowledge, you would share news. It was a great opportunity for the teams to step up and speak as well, which I also thought was really an interesting aspect. Tell us a little bit about how that evolved, and kind of we'll start talking about what your next step, which I think is the really interesting part of what your story is where you've gone in the last, say, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. So when you say expand upon that, are you talking about sort of how we think about the communication rhythms within the business?
So how you connected this organization in one big space where people could see each other face to face. That's completely different. Well, very different than what has happened over the last 2 years, where all of us have had to adjust for the pandemic. However, you guys started adjusting before the pandemic in terms of how you were seeing your workforce and how you were going to actually globally, you were starting to look globally at your workforce, but you had this really connected culture, face-to-face culture before all this. How did you evolve from there into the next steps? And let's talk about the next steps that you've taken in the last 3 years, going overseas and working with outsourcing solutions, and how you've created another business around that.
Yeah, totally. So, well, let me first start. There's a place in our old office. You guys helped us create a what I would call the interview room at the front of the office space, and we used to have this big Wordle that was laminated right on the wall. It was all these words that our team members had said about our culture, and it was sent out at one point from the marketing team and said, give us 3 words at best to define the Guidant culture. And then they sort of ranked all those and put them into a Wordle. And as you know, in Wordles or word clouds, they prioritize the size of the words based on how many times it was said. And the number 1 and 2 words that were said were family and fun. So to your point, we had built this great culture. It was based around this centralized office concept. Everybody came to work and was there 5 days a week. So it was really easy because we had management by site. There was a lot of opportunities from around the water cooler to stop in and check in on people. And so it was a very, very connected culture, and one that earned us best places to work many, many times. But in 2015, 2016, we started to notice what I would call little splinters were starting to show up. Traffic had gotten awful. I remember at one point talking to somebody who was commuting more than an hour and a half each way for their job. So spending 3 hours a day on the road, which to me, it's really hard to justify. We were struggling. We are a service-based organization. It means we deploy a tremendous amount of people to provide the services that we have. And in 2015, 2016, the $15 minimum wage is catching fire. You've got, CEOs coming out and saying they're raising the minimum wage even higher than that. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Costco. All these massive companies are gobbling up talent. So this talent scarcity issue that we're struggling with today nationally is something that's been affecting Seattle for years. So to answer your question, we decided at that point we had to think about other ways to find talent and tap into new talent pools. So we opened an office in Boise, and that came about because we were looking for places that had a lower cost of living, labor, but a significantly lower cost of living, one that was close to airports and colleges and had the amenities and all those things that we needed to have a productive workforce. But we also did go offshore, and at that point we looked at places like Vietnam and Manila as opportunities. And we originally we actually went to Vietnam first, and that really helped us in terms of recruiting additional engineering talent. But we also
did you start in engineering, and that was your first position that you were like, hey, we need to grow our engineering team. We didn't really have a lot of engineers at the time, and you said, let's do it overseas versus do it domestically. Is that kind of how it went?
Great question. So I want to be really clear. Our strategy with offshore talent has never been to reduce onshore talent. It's always been a growth strategy for us.
You didn't have them to begin with, so you were saying, which direction will I go? You were at a fork in the road.
No, we had a full engineering team here, but we knew we had to make more investments in technology. But unfortunately, we were in a place where that would not have been the responsible way for us to grow. So we didn't eliminate jobs here, but we added jobs along the way there, and allowed us to scale more effectively from that standpoint. And so that's how we've always looked at it. It's a chance for us to lift up both the workers here and abroad. So when we create teams offshore, we have to then build additional supervisor capacity and up-level the talent onshore for us to be able to make that work. So it's been a fantastic strategy for us. And today, actually about a third of our workforce is offshore. We have about 200 people total, and about 60 of them are offshore.
So 200 people total, 60 of them offshore. And in what countries are you currently offshore working? Is it primarily Philippines?
Yeah, the Philippines is where the super majority of our people are. And then we still have our engineering team in Vietnam. Manila was great because we could find really skilled labor. It wasn't just assistants, because you hear this a lot of time. People talk about offshoring, and it's just the administrative work that they don't want to pay for here. And so they send it off to a more cost-effective geography. But we are finding everything from accountants to sales development reps to marketing automation specialists, project managers, software engineers. About any skilled labor role that you can think of can be done offshore. We just happen to like the Philippines because it aligns with our service-based culture. It's an English-speaking organization with a very soft or neutral accent.
And isn't English their first language over there? Considered that their first?
It is an English-speaking country.
Yeah.
They have the original language there is Tagalog. But super majority of people there speak English, and the accent is neutral, so it's a great place for voice roles. And the cost benefits are significant.
So talk a little bit about, so you've talked about the transition where you saw the fork in the road, where you had to grow more and you looked at the options of growth, and that's where it took you offshore a little bit. But talk about making this change from Bellevue, Washington, right along, by the way, 405, which is one of the top 5 worst traffic freeways in the country. People don't realize this. Thursday afternoon, 4:30 is the worst, like the third worst place to be in the country, traffic-wise. So yeah, no kidding on the traffic. We've had the same problems with cost of living pushing our teams further out and having this massive problem. So talk about Boise and what that transition's been like. And you, your family, and Jeremy's family have both moved down there. So
I mean, the Seattle market's a tough market to do business in today, and it's one that we still have at Guidant. If you look at where we have the most number of people in any one location, it's still Washington. So we have a great team here, but it's not a place we're aggressively growing because of all the things you just said. It's hard. There are a lot of places where we think there are additional opportunities that we can expand to that are best for all parties. The jump to Boise has gone very, very well. We found great talent, but as a result of having now 2 offices, and at the time it was really Seattle and Boise, we've now opened up a new office in the Philippines. So we've got these sort of pockets of concentration that are happening everywhere. We've gone from fully centralized to now completely decentralized, and so we've had to invest a lot more in what you were talking about earlier, and that is the business rhythms, how we plan, how we communicate, how information cascades down throughout the organization, how we think about developing culture. I mean, we've had to really reinvent all of this, and we were starting that reinvention before COVID, and that just, decimated that work and sort of threw lighter fluid on accelerating it to a more flexible and remote workforce.
Unbelievable. And I think that, CEOs and those who run organizations listening to you now are going, well, he's gone offshore with part of his growth, and he's gone to Boise in search of talent and lower commutes and better cost of living for his other part. But how does he kind of control, is there a hub? And it sounds like there's spokes here, Boise, there sounds like an existence still. There's still some people in the local Seattle Bellevue market. Are the folks in Bellevue working from home primarily then? Is it a hybrid environment?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Well, so COVID, we're at a really interesting time for Guidant, because when COVID hit in 2020, it aligned with our office leases expiring.
Oh, good.
So we went full remote. And we're still full remote today. I mean, until or unless COVID is off the radar, we don't want to be obligating ourselves to office space and have to pay for something that we may not be able to utilize. And so right now we are, between Doxa 7 and Guidant Financial, we've got 350 people across the world that are in a fully remote environment and have been for almost 2 years. So we've had to reinvent everything along the way.
And so how have you connected the dots on there's a lot of concern around organizations, culture, what it was before was this connected culture with drive-bys and people within vision and sight, but now it's, hey, people working remotely, and there's the, obviously you don't pick up all the body language on the Zoom calls and all that kind of stuff. So how do you change gears so that it's got to be different, maybe not perfect, maybe there's a struggle there, which is a healthy struggle, but what's that like? What's it going, what's your line of thought? What's your strategy and tactics to keep people connected and to have a culture now that we're completely remote and all over the world?
Yeah. It's well, the good news is COVID forced everybody into the same situation. Yep. So our team is giving us a lot of grace as we've sort of fumbled through all of this.
Yeah.
We were on the path to being what I would call a hybrid organization, where we had, a central headquarters and we had maybe a couple of small satellite offices, but that sort of blew up that strategy and forced us into a full remote world.
Right.
Right now, actually, I think we've been relatively effective. The things that we've done that I think that have really helped is, one, we implemented EOS, which is a method of operating a business. There's Scale Up, there's EOS, there's many others, but we put EOS in place. It gives us a predictable process for planning so that everybody sort of understands what our priorities are, what we're working on, what we're working towards. It helps us cascade information throughout the organization. That weekly stand-up that you referred to earlier, we now are doing in a virtual environment. But to your point, you have to work so much harder in person. They can read your body language. They can sort of sense, your authenticity. It's easier to be engaged when you're in person, but when you're remote, it's easy to be distracted by what's going on your computer, your emails coming through.
Oh, yeah.
You're not feeling the energy of the room. You're not next to your peers. So we had to work much harder in improving the production value of that time together. Mm. And then to your point, I don't think being in an office is bad, and I don't think being full remote is bad. No. I think they can both work, but what's really hard is going from one to the other. So all of our practices were built on being in person together, and we're having to sort of work through that. So at this point, to answer your question, Matt, we're not even 100% sure what our strategy is going to be when COVID lifts. We are in that place where we're still trying to contemplate whether or not we want to be a full remote environment or a hybrid. What we know is that we're not going to be centralized anymore. We've got people in, I think, 16 states now. It's impossible to think about going back to a centralized operation. The question will be, how we think about it in the future. And some of the things that we're talking about right now would be, like, should we have a semi-annual meeting twice a year where people get together for a big, Guidant or Doxa convention? Should we have that?
That's a great idea. I love that idea.
Well, I love the idea too, but as you know, it's a massive expense. I was doing the math on this, and the cost of us having that office space in Bellevue, obviously that's a significant savings not having that anymore. Yeah. But to bring 200 people to one location, even for 3 or 4 days, one time is about a third of the cost for a year's worth of office.
And this is, everybody should know that David is a renowned learning chair of he has a global seat on the EO globally, and he runs global EO learning, and his learning events are amazing and his gatherings are amazing. So you would not half-ass something like that. And I get it.
Well, that's true. That's true. I might have maybe a little bit more discerning eye than some might.
Yeah.
But, I mean, honestly, even when I run the math, we're doing it in places like Las Vegas, which is not an expensive place to travel. It's built for conventions. We've talked about it in Boise, Idaho, and Phoenix, Arizona. Like the place that we're not talking about going to to LA or New York or places like that. And it's still a significant investment. And then the amount of time and energy it takes to put one of those things on is huge. So these are all the trade-offs that we're sort of thinking through in the moment.
So connecting the culture. So what's it feel like now if you're like an 8 or a 9, never perfect, never a 10, but out of 1 to 10 scale of cultural connection where you were in Bellevue, you're maybe 7 to 9. How do you feel like you're connected now organizationally?
So we survey our team quarterly now because we're really trying to keep a pulse on what's happening underneath the hood. Awesome. And the scores today would tell us that we're doing just as good as we did before, although, and I'll preface this. So, we ask, like, how effective do you think you are working from home on a scale of 1 to 5? And right now we're in the 4.5 range of work from home effective. So 90%, that's pretty good. How connected do you feel to your team? Very similar. And how connected do you feel your supervisor is to you and to your work is very similar. So we feel like we're performing in a really good place, but there are a couple of places where real challenges, I think, are starting to boil up. Well, I shouldn't say every, about 2/3 to 3/4 of our team signed up under the premise that they were going to get to go to an office. Now, some of them are glad to be in a remote world right now, or at least a flexible world. But there are some that are, if we don't go to an office, are likely to turn over as a result. Yeah. We also have this, if we go back to an office, others will turn over because they like working from home. And so I think there's this real interesting place that every employer is going to be at, which is like, I just got to do what's best for the business and just recognize that there is going to be turnover as a result, regardless. Yeah. The other things are, though, I talked about it earlier, cultural connection. Family and fun used to be our culture. Our whole culture was defined on this in-person human connection. And so that is something that we have to really think about.
Yeah.
Managed by sight, or management by sight, as we call it, that no longer exists. So everybody in the company has to have a number, and not every role is in a production role. So how do you measure people like marketing who are supporting acquisition to fulfillment to customer success, right? It's really hard to do that.
Yeah, it's created so many, what we find is knowledge transfer, because in our business, it's a learn by doing business. We don't personally, out of 40 years of doing this, I mean, we look at somebody just starting out raw, coming into our organization in sales or some other position. In sales especially, it takes probably 5 years to start understanding the nuance of our organization and our business and how we transact. How do you manage just, the onboarding new people and, kind of getting them up to speed? I mean, how is that transformed? I mean, I'm sure you've got a lot of things in place for that, but it's probably a big task.
Well, we're getting better at it. I would say that probably, like most of the people that are going to listen to this podcast, when we hired somebody historically, ride-alongs was the number way to train them, right? You just sit next to them, watch, ask questions, and learn. That does not exist in a remote world. It's nearly impossible. And so we've had to redefine it. I mean, right now we're building onboarding assets in a digital environment. So when we're doing trainings, we're actually recording that and be able to use that transcription then to actually build official training documentation. Eventually there will be an LMS in place so that there's sort of like this Guidant university for training and onboarding, because the way that we used to do it is just not going to be possible. And that's going to be true whether we're in a remote environment or we're in a hybrid environment, because in a hybrid environment, you're still going to have so many people that are outside of wherever that corporate headquarters is. Right. So I do think training and development is a place that all of your clients, or a lot of your clients, and a lot of the small businesses that I serve are going to have to spend a tremendous amount of time today, because COVID basically broke down all of these barriers. The world went remote. Now that local moat that we used to enjoy being in Seattle or Boise, we're like, because we're here, we have a competitive advantage for recruiting. That doesn't exist anymore. The whole thing evaporated. Now everybody, including me, is recruiting in your backyard.
Exactly. And that's a huge benefit. And so let's talk consequences, because we're getting close to the end of our time together. So tell me about the unintended consequences of some of the efforts that you've made, both in offshoring as well as movement to Boise. I know you spoke of a few that you've kind of said, hey, it feels like, people who have come to work for us understand that it's a remote work, but also there are people who have come with the anticipating working in the office with, folks in the office. What are the other unintended consequences do you think you'll face going forward with some of the decisions that you're going to have to make? And what are maybe some of those big decisions that you're sitting in right now, kind of struggling with?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of them. I mean, to be fair, I think because we're still in the middle of COVID and because restrictions still exist in so many places in both the US and internationally, people are still giving us a lot of grace, right? All of us as employers, I haven't yet met somebody who just has the strategy 100% nailed unless they were already remote beforehand, right? And so there's so many of us that I think have been given a lot of grace, rightfully so, and thankfully from our team members. That being said, I think how we think about building culture, especially connection amongst team members, like that whole concept of team and camaraderie is really important, because, previous to COVID, some of the things that I had heard and seen, validated over and over again is people leave companies because of their manager, right? Mm-hmm. And so how does that manager build relationships and effectively support and manage individuals in a virtual environment? The second is, though, people typically stay because they feel like they have a best friend. How do you create best friends if you never meet everybody, right? And so that's something we have to really, really think about. Yeah. The other is then if you go to a hybrid environment, which I think is likely to be the case. So many people have gone full remote. And I think what you'll find is, I think at some point people are going to say, you know what, actually, what I'm finding, I won't talk for other people. What I'm finding is when it comes to pure execution, being remote is very, very efficient.
Yeah.
But when it comes to collaboration, it's
learning,
harder.
Onboarding, all the,
anything that requires
Knowledge
collaboration is more challenging in a remote environment, and anything that requires production is actually easier in a remote environment, assuming your team has the environment at home and the space that they can use to do that effectively.
So one last little plug for Doxa 7. We're excited about that. We're actually looking at that for some positions at Apex. Tell us more about what, I mean, you must be on fire with that. It must be.
Well, yeah, COVID certainly has given it a tailwind. I never really talked about the reason why we got into that, but as we talked about the talent, we decided long ago that if we're going to manage people from Seattle in places like Florida and Atlanta and other states, then what would be the difference in managing them offshore? And what we found is that we could find highly skilled, high quality individuals. And what we did is we started taking some of the things that we do here in the US and applied those to our work there. So example, we're sort of leveraging assessment so that we're looking at both their skill set, but also their natural wiring to put them in roles where they are wired naturally to do that successfully over a long period of time. And we started leveraging some of the remote management tools that we began building here, those capabilities, so that we could be a flexible or remote employer without compromising data or security. And then we started leveraging things like RPA, robotic process automation, for process mapping and process optimization and task costing, so that we could improve the benefits well beyond cost arbitrage. And then, but basically what ended up happening is we were starting to have some success doing this. And I was starting to get referred through EO and some of the startup community there, entrepreneurs saying, hey, will you show them what you're doing? Can can you talk to this person about how you've built these global—
another Guidant startup.
Well, and because in offshoring in general, it's an acceptable standard that 40% turnover occurs annually, which means your average person lasts 2 years.
Right.
I can't even train and onboard someone to proficiency in less than a year. No. So to have them turn over a year later is a waste. We've seen less than 10% turnover since we've been doing this over 5 years. And so eventually I just realized we were doing things unique in the market, and we had something that could really help small and medium-sized businesses who are sort of overlooked by the industry in general.
We're a classic example of that.
Exactly. So
perfect size for that. And so, David, I know that's a rabbit hole we're going to need to go down. We're going to hopefully have you back. We really appreciate the time you shared. Thank you for coming and helping us kick off our podcast. You are a special man, and I really appreciate it. So thank you again for all the time you shared. And for all those listening, Transcending Workspaces is going to evolve and change and transcend as we go. So we'll definitely have David back, and look forward to the next time. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.